Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you know that today we are bringing up the loss of a child. And we always want to try to give you the best tools that we can provide. So in the notes of this episode, you will find some information there if you or somebody you know is struggling through that kind of loss.
My son Emmett died as a newborn, and my son Ford died at 14 months old. And so they're in the book as well, and they're really they're the everything.
Like changing of the seasons, nothing ever stays the same. Sometimes our world crashes down, all we know goes up in flames. A broken bone that heals is much stronger than before. Don't look down, keep your head up high.
Hi everybody, I'm Don Amero, and today on the show I've got a wonderful guest, Christa Couture. She's a mother, musician, and now an author, and today we're going to hear more of her story on Through the Fire.
You see the light.
Christa Couture, how are you?
I'm good.
So nice to have you here. I don't know if you know this, but when I first thought of this show, and I know we haven't talked much because I always want to save our chatting for this moment.
Save the good stuff.
Yeah, because when I first thought of this show, you were one of the first persons that came to mind for me. Because, and we're going to get into the thick stuff in a little bit, but when I think about going through stuff, there's nobody that I know more who has been through more stuff than you have in your life in terms of loss and some hardships. And
yeah.
I want to get into that in a little bit, but I want to start with a little bit lighter stuff first, because I know we met at, I believe, was it Aboriginal Music Camp a bunch of years ago?
Yeah, I think that was the first time.
Amp Camp?
Amp Camp at Falcon Lake. We
Yeah.
were maybe there the same year. Yeah.
Which we're nearing 20 years or something like that. Was that 2008?
I think the first time I went to Amp Camp was 2011.
15. Okay.
It's been a long time.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And so I know you as the musician Christa Couture, but you've now since added author to that. So what's going on with you these days? What's happening? Because the book is probably done really well, I'm thinking. And
I hope so too.
Yeah, and so what's happening with you? So are you still doing music stuff?
I'm not really doing music stuff,
Okay.
and it's almost hard to say that because it was such a big part of my life for so long.
Right.
Like when I met you those years ago, I was touring as much as I could. I've recorded 4 albums, a number of EPs, and then about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to make a shift. Partly I had to. I had a thyroidectomy. I had thyroid cancer, and my voice, it was injured for a little while. So that caused me to take a step back. And then I'd had this project of wanting to write a book that had been kind of in my head and in my heart, and stopping touring gave me the time to do that. And then I sort of fell in love with the process of writing that book. And then I decided I wanted to try and have another kid. I had my daughter, so that kept me in one place for a little while too. You know how that is.
Yeah.
And it's just been kind of feeding other projects. And I probably will go back to music, but I'm actually right now, my sort of biggest creative thing is I'm producing a series of short films, animated short films for CBC Arts that is called How to Lose Everything, which is the same name as the book. So the book has kind of grown into some other creative work that I'm really loving, and I'm just kind of connecting the dots right now.
That's really cool.
I don't know what I'm going to do next.
When I first knew you and kind of got to hang out with you at Amp Camp and over the couple of years, I didn't know fully the scope of loss that you had suffered at that point in time.
Yeah.
And you taught me something, the phrase limb difference.
Oh, cool.
Because you had your leg amputated when you were
I was 13. That's right.
Yeah, I did some research.
You're prepared.
Yeah. and so that was through something called, I didn't write it down, shoot.
Ewing sarcoma.
Ewing sarcoma.
I have
And is
bone
that the bone cancer? Okay. And so through that, how was it? What was that like going through that as a teenager, preteen and a teenager?
Yeah, I was first diagnosed with cancer when I was 11, and then had chemotherapy and radiotherapy, went into remission, and then the cancer came back. And so the amputation was the cure for my cancer, which, you know, was incredibly lucky. Everyone, you have lost someone to cancer for sure. At least one person in your life has died of cancer. Like, that's just, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so many people have cancer, so many people are impacted by it. And so I was very, very lucky that there was a cure for my cancer. I knew a lot of other kids at the time who died. I was making friends in the hospital who died. And so on one hand, I was very aware of this kind of good fortune that I had in surviving. And also, it was a huge loss, you know. My leg was amputated above the knee. I was 13 years old. It was this like kind of swirl of adolescence where, I mean, adolescence is a battlefield for everyone. You're just figuring out who you are. You're becoming more aware of your body. And then my body went through this huge, not just like adolescent changes, but I had to learn how to walk again, you know. And I was out of school for almost a year or two. I just kind of was on a very different path from my peers. And so it changed, you know, changed my whole life. It pointed me in a new direction. But I also don't know what it would be like to not have cancer. You know, it's the only kind of childhood I had, and so I can't really compare what it would be like without it or who I would be without it. You know, and of course I never would have chosen to have cancer. But at the same time, like I love who I am, and I know.
Have you always been that way, or was there a process to get to that place? Like, do you remember being 13? I would imagine at 13 it's a massive loss. I mean, it's always a loss. Yeah. But I imagine at that point in time, it's. I feel like it would be like a tidal wave.
I think it was, and I think I didn't quite realize the scope of it until really maybe in my 20s. My late teens, it started to hit me where I was like, holy smokes, this is a big deal. I was like, no one else has just one leg. Like when you're in the hospital and you're with other kids, you know, who are bald and who have their limbs being amputated, it was sort of normalized. And then I got out more into the world and I was like, oh, this is actually extraordinary. Like, I'm not meeting other amputees, other people with limb difference. And this is permanent. Like, oh, this is my life now. And so it was kind of in my 20s, I think I went through a phase of some grieving and some acceptance. And then even more into my 30s of finally kind of stepping into feeling some, not just acceptance, but even like celebration or gratitude for the experience or for being in this body. But yeah, I think it, you know, on one hand, you know, being 13 and being young, and it's hard to think of, like now when I see pictures of me like at 11-year-olds are little, you know, like
my
you don't
boy's
feel
just about
little,
11.
right?
Yeah.
And when you're 11, you don't feel little, but you see, you know, I'm sure you look at your kid and you're like, oh man, he's still a kid, right?
Totally.
And so in some ways it's a heartbreak to think about going through that at that age.
Little Christa.
Yeah. At the same time though, I think because I was young, it just shifted me. You know, I didn't have a sense, like I think if I were, you know, and now to experience that kind of physical change, I would have already been sort of settled in my adult life in a certain way, and I would be losing what I know my life to be. Right. But at 13, I didn't know what my life was going to be. Like I think probably more my parents and my family were like, okay, this is going to be a different path. But I think, you know, the way that kids adjust and accommodate and kind of go with it. It's not to say it wasn't hard, but I think, again, I didn't have a sort of bigger picture understanding of the world, so it just was my world.
Limb difference, this phrase.
Limb difference, I love that you picked that up.
So where is that something you, because I hadn't heard the term before.
Okay, cool. Okay, so it's not something I came up with, but it is, you know, a broad term that a lot of people with limb difference will use. I often say amputee. I mean, my leg was amputated, so that's accurate. But some people are born without a limb, which would be like a congenital limb difference, and so some of those people will also use amputee, but their leg, they didn't have a limb that was removed. That's just how their body grew. That's just their body. And so for them, I think limb difference feels more accurate because it's just different hair color, different limbs, different thing about your body.
It's a more inclusive term in my experience.
I think
with using it now
exactly.
More than ever,
I'm glad that you use it. That's awesome that you picked up on it because I think, you know, language is so important, and within disability, there's so many different kind of identities. But limb difference is a nice kind of umbrella term for everything that comes under there.
Right. Yeah. Can I ask you about Emmett and Ford?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Emmett and Ford, your 2 children who you lost.
Yeah.
You know, that I'm sure it was a big part of, obviously, in the book, How to Lose Everything.
Yeah, so the book, How to Lose Everything, each chapter is about a different loss that I've experienced, and you've mentioned that I happen to be someone who's had a few, and we've talked about cancer and my leg being amputated, and so those are in there, and a few other losses. But my son Emmett died as a newborn, and my son Ford died at 14 months old. And so they're in the book as well, and they're really they're the everything. You know, I mean, losing my leg was hard, sure,
Yeah.
but that's not losing a person. And a lot of my music is about those losses as well. But I think even because the book had been sort of on my mind, I felt like for a lot of years I was singing about the loss of my kids, and I was talking about it sometimes, but I felt like I so wanted to tell the story in a deeper, bigger way, which I got to do in the book, and what it meant to me to go through those losses, what it means to me now. I mean, it's been, it was just the anniversary of Ford's death. It's been 12 years. And so, which in some ways feels like no time at all, and also
Right.
like enough time has passed that I can sit here and tell you about it, right? But I love to talk about them, not just because they're my sons and I love them, but I feel strongly about talking about grief, and we all have it, or we're gonna have it, and I feel like some of our harder stories, it can be hard to articulate them, and the more that we see other people do it, I think it makes it easier for us to maybe name our own hard stories. And so I always felt sort of moved to talk about my heartbreak, hoping that it kind of like helps us all feel a little less lonely. Yeah.
I know when I first heard that story from you, it was this, I mean, there's this feeling of, as a parent, I've got 3 kids, and when I first heard that story, my son was probably around the age that Ford would have probably been. Like our kids would have been around the same age. Like my son's almost 11 now, so it's pretty close. And there's this feeling for me, and you might have heard this before from other parents, but it almost feels like guilt. Like, oh, but I there's this sense of like, I feel like, can I talk about my kids with you, right? And I do wonder if there's that feeling of like wanting to protect you because of these memories that I'm building with my children.
Yeah.
You didn't get to have those years. And there's this feeling, so my heart broke when I heard that story for you. And also the sense of like camaraderie, because it's every parent's nightmare essentially, right? Like there's no other way to describe it. And I think for me, it's really just about wanting, in my way, to support you as a fellow parent, too, and knowing that you've been through that. And one thing that I find so incredible, because this show is called Through the Fire.
Right.
When I think about the fires of life, you've been through a big one, and more than once. And I think, how do you do that? How do you find what pieces did you cling to or hold on to in that season? Because I want to know, and I know people out there are probably wondering the same thing, and I'm sure it's in the book.
I sure think, read the book. Read the book.
Yeah. I haven't read the book. I apologize. I haven't gotten into it.
You'll get to it. I mean, okay, first of all, I want to say thank you for. I remember telling you we were in a restaurant in Toronto at. It was after AMP Camp. It was the next whatever, professional
incarnation of it.
Thing.
Something. Yeah.
And I remember telling you, and I remember seeing you feel it. I remember seeing it. You feel it in your heart, and that you felt for me, and that meant a lot to me, because sometimes I tell people, and it's too much for them, which I get. Some people are like, whoa, okay, and they can't. Right. They can't, and that's also fine. You never know where someone's at. I remember telling you because you were really kind. And it's to lose a child it's not impossible. It's not even that uncommon necessarily, but to lose 2 is more uncommon, particularly in Canada and in my social location and in living in a major city and all the things that can healthcare and all of that. Other parts of the world that don't have that access that I've had. But so I know that it is quite something. And again, because it's me, because it's my story, and I don't know anything else. In some ways, I feel like this is my norm. This is my life. This is what I've been living with. But that's not to say that it hasn't been, or it wasn't, devastating. And for a long time, the only thing, like I feel for a long time, I just was in this. I just was in the heartache. I just was in so much sorrow and grief and regret, and like everything was just like this for so long. And sometimes people ask me how I got through it, or how am I okay? Sometimes people look at me and they're like, how are you? What? But and then I have a few answers to it, because the biggest thing, the piece of advice that I can give to anyone if they're immediately in the immediate aftermath of a huge loss, if it's a child or something else, whatever your big thing, is that you have to wait. Like, you just have to wait. There's it's not that the time heals, like that's a cliche, but there is something to time passing. And there's a lot for me that there's sort of a contextual resilience. I feel like sometimes people look at me and they want to sort of elevate my individual resilience, and it's not to diminish my own spirit or my choices, but I had community. I was always housed. I had, people who, brought me food, who helped take care of me, and those are huge, right? Like, I could have easily, if I didn't have those resources, easily lost my home, or easily been in a path of addiction, or the things that happen when you maybe don't have the same resources. I accessed therapy, thank goodness. That really carried me through.
Right.
And music for a long time also really carried me through. I had something to put it all into. If I'd been a gardener, I would have just been in the backyard digging through the dirt for 5 years.
Like an outlet.
I need an outlet, and I think I was lucky that I knew what my outlet was. Maybe some people haven't found it yet, and I was like, okay, I can sit at the piano and I can bang on the piano and I can sob and I can sing, and it moves something through me. And just kind of trying, one foot in front of the other, of holding on to my family, holding on to my friends, holding on to music, letting those things hold on to me when I wanted to let go. And I think, for me, the grief hasn't gotten smaller over time. Like, I talked about feeling so kind of in the middle of it. It was my entire landscape. But over time, there's been like things that have grown around it. Like, I feel like now, now I can visit that grief. I can walk around it. I see it. Sometimes I'll step right in it again. But there's other work, other relationships. And I have a daughter now who's 4 years old. And Sona, that's right. And so that parenting part of my heart, not that it fixes the loss of my sons, but I get to parent.
Right.
And I get to give that to her. We have elevated resilience in a way that we put so much emphasis on the individual that I think can be unfair, because it's okay if you're not resilient. Like, it's okay if you can't handle it. Like, we need community care. We need to take care of each other. And if for whatever reasons you maybe don't have that around you, like, it's probably not your fault. Like, we see people who are struggling, and it's not that they're, they're not resilient, they can't handle it. Like, that's fine. We need to step in and help. And so I think for me, getting through, like, what I often want to share with people is, like, look around you, and if maybe you think you don't have that person who's there for you, but maybe they are. Maybe you can reach out. Or if you're someone who's doing okay, like, keeping in mind who's in your network, who do you see who might need some support, like, because that's really what gets us through, is helping each other when we need it. And so I've been so lucky to have help and have people, shelter me and carry me.
I think if we just take a little bit more time to be patient and kind to each other, and recognizing, wait a second, like, we're all carrying something, And I think one of the feelings I get from you too is that you you offer that, and I think you offer that to people, and I think we can all learn so much from that. I value that so much, and I value that in our friendship, and I feel like, again, every time I end these conversations, I feel like there's so much more to say, but for time and for respecting your time too, I just want to say thanks so much for coming to share some of these thoughts with us, and I think it's important to remember these things that you're sharing with us today.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks, Don. I mean, thank you for having me. And like I said, I feel like anytime any of us tell our stories and you're sharing all these stories here, it's like it helps. It just helps all of us like feel grounded in our stories, I think.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you, Christa. Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
You see